This is The Wasp Factory by Ian Banks, author of A Song of Stone, named one of the top 100 novels of the century by The Independent. There, got got past that got past that cover. Successfully this time for Anne. Chapter 1, The Sacrifice Poles. Let me get it up within my microphone here. I'd been making the rounds of the sacrifice poles the day we heard my brother had escaped. I already knew something was going to happen. The factory had told me. At the north end of the island, near the tumbled remains of the slip where the handle of the rusty winch still creaks in an easterly wind, I had 2 poles on the far face of the last dune. One of the poles held a rat head with 2 dragonflies, the other a seagull and 2 mice. I was just sticking one of the mouse heads back on when the birds went up into the evening air, caw-calling and screaming, wheeling over the path through the dunes where it went near their nests. I made sure the head was secure and then clambered to the top of the dune to watch with my binoculars. Diggs, the policeman from the town, was coming down the path on his bike, pedaling hard, his head down as the wheels sank part way into the sandy surface. He got off the bike at the bridge and left it propped against the suspension cables. Then walked to the middle of the swaying bridge where the gate is. I could see him press the button on the phone. He stood for a while, looking around at the quiet dunes and the settling birds. He didn't see me because I was too well hidden. Then my father must have answered the buzzer in the house because Diggs stooped slightly and talked into the grill beside the button, and then pushed the gate open and walked over the bridge, onto the island, and down the path towards the house. When he disappeared behind the dunes, I sat for a while, scratching my crotch as the wind played with my hair and the birds returned to their nests. I took my catapult from my belt, selected a half-inch steely, sighted carefully, and then sent the big ball bearing arcing out over the river, the telephone poles, and the little suspension bridge to the mainland. The shot hit the "Keep Out, Private Property" sign with a thud I could just hear, and I smiled. It was a good omen. The factory hadn't been specific, it rarely is, but I had the feeling that whatever it was warning about was important, and I also suspected it would be bad, but I had been wise enough to take the hint and check my poles, and now I knew my aim was still good. Things were still with me. I decided not to go straight back to the house. Father didn't like me to be in there when Diggs came, and anyway, I still had a couple of poles to check before the sun went down. I jumped and slid down the slope of the dune into its shadow, and turned at the bottom to look back up at those small heads and bodies as they watched over the northern approaches to the island. They looked fine, those husks on their gnarled branches. Black ribbons tied to the wooden limbs blew softly in the breeze, waving at me. I decided nothing would be too bad, and that tomorrow I would ask the factory for more information. If I was lucky, my father might tell me something, and if I was luckier still, it might even be the truth. I left the sack of heads and bodies in the bunker just as the light was going completely and the stars were starting to come out. The birds had told me Diggs had left a few minutes earlier, so I ran back the quick way to the house, where the lights all burned as usual. My father met me in the kitchen. "Diggs was just here, I suppose you know." He put the stub of the fat cigar he'd been smoking under the cold tap, turned the water on for a second while the brown stump sizzled and died, then threw the sodden remnant in the bin. I put my things down on the big table and sat down, shrugging. My father turned up the ring on the cooker under the soup pan, looking beneath the lid into the warming mixture, and then turning back to look at me. There was a layer of gray-blue smoke in the room at about shoulder level, and a big wave in it, probably produced by me as I came in through the double doors of the back porch. The wave rose slowly between us while my father stared at me. I fidgeted, then looked down, toying with the wrist rest of the black catapult. It crossed my mind that my father looked worried, but he was good at acting, and perhaps that was just what he wanted me to think, so deep down I remained unconvinced. "I suppose I'd better tell you," he said, then turned away again, taking up a wooden spoon and stirring the soup. I waited. "It's Eric." Then I knew what had happened. He didn't have to tell me the rest. I suppose I could have thought from the little he'd said up until then that my half-brother was dead or ill or that something had happened to him, but I knew it was something Eric had done. And there was only one thing he could have done which would make my father look worried. He had escaped. I didn't say anything, though. Eric has escaped from the hospital. That was what Diggs came to tell us. They think he might head back here. Take those things off the table, I've told you before. He sipped the soup, his back still turned. I waited until he started to turn round, then took the catapult, binoculars, and spade off the table. In the same flat tone, my father went on. Well, I don't suppose he'll get this far. They'll probably pick him up in a day or two. I just thought I'd tell you, in case anybody else hears and says anything. Get out a plate. I went to the cupboard and took out a plate, then sat down again, one leg crossed underneath me. My father went back to stirring the soup, which I could smell now above the cigar smoke. I could feel excitement in my stomach, a rising, tingling rush. So Eric was coming back home again. That was good, bad. I knew he'd make it. I didn't even think of asking the factory about it. He'd be here. I wondered how long it would take him, and whether Diggs would now have to go shouting through the town, warning that the mad boy who set fire to dogs was on the loose again. Lock up your hounds. My father ladled some soup into my plate, and I blew on it. I thought of the sacrifice poles. They were my early warning system, and deterrent rolled into one. Infected, potent things, which looked out from the island, warding off. Those totems were my warning shot. Anybody who set foot on the island after seeing them should know what to expect. But it looked like, instead of being a clenched and threatening fist, they would present a welcoming, open hand for Eric. "So you washed your hands again," my father said as I sipped the hot soup. He was being sarcastic. He took the bottle of whiskey from the dresser and poured himself a drink. The other glass, which I guessed had been the constable's, he put in the sink. He sat down at the far end of the table. My father's tall and slim, slightly stooped. He has a delicate face like a woman's, and his eyes are dark. He limps now, and has done ever since I can remember. His left leg is almost totally stiff, and he usually takes a stick with him when he leaves the house. Some days, when it's damp, he has to use the stick inside, too. I can hear him clacking about the uncarpeted rooms and corridors of the house, a hollow noise going from place to place. Only here in the kitchen is the stick quieted. The flagstones silence it. That stick is the symbol of my factory's security. My father's leg, locked solid, has given me my sanctuary up in the warm space of the big loft, right at the top of the house where the junk and the rubbish are, where the dust moves and the sunlight slants and the factory sits, silent, living, and still. My father can't climb up the narrow ladder from the top floor, and even if he could, I know he wouldn't be able to negotiate the twist you have to make to get from the top of the ladder, round the brickwork of the chimney flues, and into the loft proper. So, the place is mine. I suppose my father's about 45 now, though sometimes I think he looks a lot older, and occasionally I think he might be a little younger. He won't tell me his real age, so 45 is my estimate, judging by his looks. "What height is this table?" he said suddenly, just as I was about to go to the bread bin for a slice to wipe my plate with. I turned around and looked at him, wondering why he was bothering with such an easy question. 30 inches, I told him, and took a crust from the bin. "Wrong," he said with an eager grin. 2'6". I shook my head at him, scowling, and wiped the brown rim of the soup from the inside of my plate. There was a time when I was genuinely afraid of these idiotic questions, but now, apart from the fact that I must know the height, length, breadth, area, and volume of just about every part of the house and everything in it, I can see my father's obsession for what it is. It gets embarrassing at times, when there are guests in the house, even if they're family and ought to know what to expect. They'll be sitting there, probably in the lounge, wondering whether Father's going to feed them anything or just give an impromptu lecture on cancer of the colon or tapeworms, when he'll sidle up to somebody, look round to make sure everybody's watching, then, in a conspiratorial stage whisper, say, "See that door over there? It's 85 inches, corner to corner." Then he'll wink and walk off, or slide over on his seat, looking nonchalant. Ever since I can remember, there have been little stickers of white paper all over the house with neat black bureau writing on them. Attached to the legs of chairs, the edges of rugs, the bottoms of jugs, the aerials of radios, the doors of drawers, the headboards of beds, the screens of televisions, the handles of pots and pans, they give the appropriate measurement for the part of the object they're stuck to. There are even ones in pencil stuck to the leaves of plants. When I was a child, I once went round to the house tearing all the stickers off. I was belted and sent to my room for 2 days. Later, my father decided it would be useful and character-forming for me to know all the measurements as well as he did. So I had to sit for hours with the measurement book, a huge loose-leaf thing with all the information on the little stickers carefully recorded according to room and category of object. or go around the house with a jotter making my own notes. This was all in addition to the usual lessons my father gave me on mathematics and history and so on. It didn't leave much time for going out to play, and I resented it a great deal. I was having a war at the time, the mussels against the dead flies, I think it was, and while I was in the library poring over the book and trying to keep my eyes open, soaking up all those damn silly imperial measurements, the wind would be blowing my fly armies over half the island, and the sea would first sink the mussel shells in their high pools and then cover them with sand. Luckily, my father grew tired of this grand scheme and contented himself with firing the odd surprise question at me concerning the capacity of the umbrella stand in pints, or the total area and fractions of an acre of all the curtains in the house actually hung up at the time. I'm not answering these questions anymore, I said to him as I took my plate to the sink. We should have gotten metric years ago. My father snorted into his glass as he drained it. Hectares and all that sort of rubbish. Certainly not. It's all based on the measurement of the globe, you know. I don't have to tell you what nonsense that is. I sighed as I took an apple from the bowl on the windowsill. My father once had me believing that the earth was a Mobius strip, not a sphere. He still maintains that he believes this, and makes a great show of sending off a manuscript to publishers down in London, trying to get them to publish a book expounding this view. But I know he's just mischief-making again, and gets most of his pleasure from his acts of stunned disbelief and then righteous indignation when the manuscript is eventually returned. This occurs about every 3 months, and I doubt that life would be half as much fun for him without this sort of ritual. Anyway, that's one of the reasons for not switching over to a metric standard for his stupid measurements, though, in fact, he's just lazy. What were you up to today? He stared across the table at me, rolling the empty tumbler around on the wooden tabletop. I shrugged. Out, walking and things. Building dams again? He sneered. No, I said, shaking my head confidently and biting the apple. Not today. I hope you weren't out killing any of God's creatures. I shrugged at him again. Of course I was out killing things. How the hell am I supposed to get heads and bodies for the poles in the bunker if I don't kill things? There aren't enough natural deaths. You can't explain that sort of thing to people, though. Sometimes I think you're the one that should be in the hospital, not Eric. He was looking at me from under his dark brows. His voice was low. Once, that sort of talk would have scared me, but not now. I'm nearly 17, and not a child. Here in Scotland, I'm old enough to get married without my parents' permission, and have been for a year. There wouldn't be much point to me getting married, I'll admit that, but the principle is there. Besides, I'm not Eric. I'm me, and I'm here, and that's all there is to it. I don't bother people, and they'd best not bother me if they know it's good for them. I don't go giving people presents of burning dogs, or frighten the local toddlers with handfuls of maggots and mouthfuls of worms. People in my town may say, "Oh, he's not all there, you know," but that's their little joke, and sometimes, just to rub it in, they don't point to their heads as they say it. I don't mind. I've learned to live with my disability, and learned to live without other people, so it's no skin off my nose. But my father seemed to be trying to hurt me, though. He wouldn't say something like that normally. The news about Eric must have shaken him. I think he knew, just as I did, that Eric would come back, and he was worried about what would happen. I didn't blame him, and I didn't doubt that he was also worried about me. I represent a crime, and if Eric was to come back stirring things up, the truth about Frank might come out. I was never registered. I have no birth certificate, no national insurance number, nothing to say I'm alive or have ever existed. I know this is a crime, and so does my father, and I think that sometimes he regrets the decision he made 17 years ago in his hippie anarchist days or whatever. Not that I've suffered, I've enjoyed it, and you could hardly say that I wasn't educated. I probably know more about the conventional school subjects than most of the people my age. I could complain about the truth of some of the bits of information my father passed on to me, mind you. Ever since I was able to go to Port Neal alone and check things up in the library, my father has had to be pretty straight with me. But when I was younger, he used to fool me time after time, answering my honest, if naive questions with utter rubbish. For years, I believed Pathos was one of the Three Musketeers, Fellatio was a character in Hamlet, Vitreous a town in China, and that Irish peasants had to tread the peat to make Guinness. Well, These days, I can reach the highest shelves of the house library and walk into Port Neal to visit the one there, so I can check up on anything my father says, and he has to tell me the truth. It annoys him a lot, I think, but that's the way things go. Call it progress. But I am educated. While he wasn't able to resist indulging his rather immature sense of humor by selling me a few dummies, my father couldn't abide a son of his not being a credit to him in some way. My body was a forlorn hope for any improvement, so only my mind was left. Hence, all my lessons. My father is an educated man, and he passed a lot of what he already knew on to me, as well as doing a fair bit of study himself in areas he didn't know all that much, just so he could teach me. My father's a doctor of chemistry, or perhaps biochemistry. He seems to have known enough about ordinary medicine, and perhaps still have had the contacts within the profession to make sure that I got all my inoculations and injections at the correct times, despite my official non-existence as far as the National Health Service is concerned. I knew him, fellatio. I think my father used to work in a university for a few years after he graduated, and he might have invented something. He occasionally hints that he gets some sort of royalty from a patent or something, but I suspect the old hippie survives on whatever family wealth the call dames still have secreted away. Family's been in this part of Scotland for about 200 years or more from what I can gather. We used to own a lot of the land around here. Now all we have is the island, and that's pretty small, and hardly even an island at low tide. The only other remnant of our glorious past is the name of Port Neal's hotspot, a grubby old pub called the Caldim Arms, where I go sometimes now, though still underage of course, and watch some of the local youths trying to be punk bands. That was where I met and still meet the only person I'd call a friend, Jamie the Dwarf, whom I let sit on my shoulders so he can see the bands. Well, I don't think he'll get this far. They'll pick him up, my father said again, after a long and brooding silence. He got up to rinse his glass. I hummed to myself, something I always used to do when I wanted to smile or laugh but thought better of it. My father looked at me. I'm going to the study. Don't forget to lock up, all right? Okie doke, I said, nodding. Good night. My father left the kitchen. I sat and looked at my trowel, stout stroke. Little grains of dry sand stuck to it, so I brushed them off. The study. One of my few remaining unsatisfied ambitions is to get into the old man's study. The cellar I've at least seen, and been in occasionally. I know all the rooms on the ground floor and the second. The loft is my domain entirely, and home of the Wasp factory no less. But that one room on the first floor I don't know. I've never even seen inside. I do know he has some chemicals in there, and I suppose he does experiments or something. But what the room looks like, what he actually does in there, I have no idea. All I've ever got out of it are a few funny smells and the tap-tap of my father's stick. I stroked the long handle of the trowel, wondering if my father had a name for that stick of his. I doubted it. He doesn't attach the same importance to them as I do. I know that they're important. I think there's a secret in the study. He'd hinted as much more than once, just vaguely, just enough to entice me so that I want to ask what, so that he knows I want to ask. I don't ask, of course, because I wouldn't get any worthwhile answer. If he did tell me anything, it would be a pack of lies, because obviously the secret wouldn't be secret anymore if he told me the truth. And he can feel, as I do, that with my increasing maturity, he needs all the holds over me he can get. I'm not a child anymore. Only these little bits of bogus power enable him to think he's in control of what he sees as the correct father-son relationship. It's pathetic, really, but with his little games and his secrets and his hurtful remarks, he tries to keep his security intact. I leaned back in the wooden chair and stretched. I liked the smell of the kitchen. The food and the mud on our Wellingtons, and sometimes the faint tang of cordite coming out from the cellar, all give me a good, tight, thrilling feel when I think about them. It smells different when it's been raining and our clothes are wet. In the winter, the big black stove pumps out heat fragrant with driftwood or peat, and everything steams and the rain hammers against the glass. Then it has a comfortable, closed-in feeling, making you feel cozy, like a great big cat with its tail curled around itself. Sometimes I wish we had a cat. All I've ever had was a head, and that the seagulls took. I went to the toilet, down the corridor off the kitchen, for a crap. I didn't need to pee because I'd been pissing on the poles during the day, infecting them with my scent and power. I sat there and thought about Eric, to whom such an unpleasant thing had happened. Poor twisted bugger. I'd wondered, as I have often wondered, how I would have coped, but it didn't happen to me. I've stayed here, and Eric was the one who went away, and it all happened somewhere else. That's all there is to it. I'm me, and here's here. I listened, wondering if I could hear my father. Perhaps he'd gone straight to bed. He often sleeps in the study rather than in the big bedroom on the second floor, where mine is. Maybe that room holds too many unpleasant or pleasant memories for him. Either way, I couldn't hear any snoring. I hate having to sit down in the toilet all the time. With my unfortunate disability, I usually have to, as though I was a bloody woman, but I hate it. Sometimes in the Caldham Arms, I stand up at the urinal, but most of it ends up running down my hands or legs. I strained, plop splash, some water came up and hit my bum, and that was when the phone went. Shit, I said, and then laughed at myself. I cleaned my arse quickly and pulled my trousers up, pulling the chain too, and then waddling out into the corridor, zipping up. I ran up the broad stairs to the first floor landing, where our only phone is. I'm forever on at my father to get more phones put in, but he says we don't get called often enough to warrant extensions. I got to the phone before whoever was calling rang off. My father hadn't appeared. "Hello," I said. It was a call box. "Scrock!" screamed a voice at the other end. I held the receiver away from my ear and looked at it, scowling. Tinny yells continued to come from the earpiece. When they stopped, I put my ear back to it. "Port Neal 531, I said coldly. Frank, it's me. Hey, hello there, hello." "Is there an echo on this line, or are you saying everything twice?" I said. I could recognize Eric's voice. "Both." "Hello, Eric. Where are you?" "Here. Where are you?" "Here." "If we're both here, why are we bothering with the phone?" "Tell me where you are before your money runs out." "But if you're here, you must know. Don't you know where you are?" I said calmly, "Stop being silly, Eric." "I'm not being silly. I'm not telling you where I am. You'll only tell Angus, and he'll tell the police, and they'll take me back to the fucking hospital." "Don't use four-letter words. You know I don't like them." "Of course I won't tell Dad." "Fucking's not a four-letter word. It's a seven-letter word. Isn't that your lucky number?" "No." "Look, will you tell me where you are? I want to know." I'll tell you where I am if you'll tell me what your lucky number is." "My lucky number is E." "It's not a number. It's a letter." "It is a number," I said. "It's a transcendental number. 2.718. That's cheating. I meant an integer." "You should have been more specific," I said, and then sighed as the pip sounded and Eric eventually put more money in. "Do you want me to call you back?" "Yeah, you're not getting out of me that easy. How are you anyway?" "I'm fine. How are you?" "Mad, of course," he said, quite indignantly. I had to smile. "Look, I'm assuming you're coming back here. If you are, please don't burn any dogs or anything, okay?" "What are you talking about? It's me, Eric. I don't burn dogs," he started to shout. "I don't burn fucking dogs. What the hell do you think I am? Don't accuse me of burning fucking dogs, you little bastard." "All right, Eric, I'm sorry, I said as quickly as I could. "I just want you to be okay. Be careful. Don't do anything to antagonize people. You know, people can be sensitive." "Well," I could hear him say. I listened to him breathing, and then his voice changed. "Yeah, I'm coming back home. Just for a short while. To see how you both are. I suppose it's just you and the old man." "Yeah, just the two of us. I'm looking forward to seeing you." "Oh, good." There was a pause. "Why don't you ever come to visit me?" I thought Father was down to see you at Christmas." "Was he? Well, but why don't you ever come?" He sounded plaintive. I shifted my weight to my other foot, looked around the landing and up the stairs, half expecting to see my father leaning over the banister rail, or to see his shadow on the wall of the landing above, where he thought he could hide and listen to my phone calls without me knowing. I don't like leaving the island for that long, Eric. I'm sorry, but I get this horrible feeling in my stomach, as though there's a great big knot in it. I just can't go that far away. Not overnight, or... I just can't. I want to see you, but you're so far away. I'm getting closer. He sounded confident again. Good. How far away are you? Not telling you. I told you my lucky number. I lied. I'm still not telling you. That's not... Well, I'll hang up now. You don't want to talk to Dad? Not yet. I'll talk to him later when I'm closer. I'm going now. See you. Take care. You take care. What's to worry about? I'll be all right. What's going to happen to me? Just don't do anything to annoy people, you know? I mean, they get angry. About pets, especially. I mean, I'm not... What about pets? He shouted. Nothing. I was just saying, you little shit, he screamed. You're accusing me of burning dogs again, aren't you? I suppose I stick worms and maggots into kids' mouths and piss on them too, huh? He shrieked. Well, I said carefully. Bastard! You little shit. I should kill you. His voice disappeared, and I had to put the phone away from my ear again as he started to hammer the handset against the walls of the call box. A succession of loud clunks sounded over the calm pips as his money ran out. I put the phone back in the cradle. I looked up, but there was still no sign of Father. I crept up the stairs and stuck my head between the banisters, but the landing was empty. I sighed and sat down on the stairs. I got the feeling I hadn't handled Eric very well over the phone. I'm not very good with people, and even though Eric is my brother, I haven't seen him for over 2 years, since he went crazy. I got up and went back down to the kitchen to lock up and get my gear. Then I went to the bathroom. I decided to watch the television in my room, or listen to the radio, and get to sleep early so I could be up just after dawn to catch a Wasp for the factory. I lay on my bed listening to John Peel on the radio, and the noise of the wind round the house and the surf on the beach. Beneath my bed, my home brew gave off a yeasty smell. I thought again of the sacrifice poles, more deliberately this time, picturing each one in turn, remembering their positions and their components, seeing in my mind what those sightless eyes looked out to, and flicking through each view like a security guard, changing cameras on a monitor screen. I felt nothing amiss. All seemed well. My dead centuries, those extensions of me which came under my power through the simple but ultimate surrender of death, sensed nothing to harm me or the island. I opened my eyes and put the bedside light back on. I looked at myself in the mirror on the dressing table over on the other side of the room. I was lying on top of the bed covers, naked apart from my underpants. I'm too fat. It isn't that bad, and it isn't my fault, but all the same, I don't look the way I'd like to look. Chubby, that's me. Strong and fit, but still too plump. I want to look dark and menacing, the way I ought to look, the way I should look, the way I might have looked if I hadn't had my little accident. Looking at me, you'd never guess I've killed 3 people. It's not fair. I switched the light out again. The room was totally dark, not even the starlight showing while my eyes adjusted. Perhaps I'd ask for one of those LED alarm radios, though I'm very fond of my old brass alarm clock. Once I tied a wasp to the striking surface of each of the copper-colored bells on the top, where the little hammer would hit them in the morning when the alarm went off. I always wake up before the alarm goes, so I got to watch. End of chapter 1. I'm going to run to the restroom. Give me 1 sec here. How is it so hot? My butt cheeks are in their sweating era. Let me look at how long chapter 2 is. It's quite long. Oh man. TBH? Yeah. Let's see. Okay, there's a big break here on like a few pages in. I think I'm gonna get a little under halfway through it, and that's what we'll do. I don't have it in me today. Chapter 2, The Snake Park. I took the little cinder that was the remains of the Wasp and put it into the matchbox, wrapped in an old photograph of Eric with my father. In the picture, my father was holding a portrait-sized photograph of his first wife, Eric's mother, and she was the only one who was smiling. My father was staring at the camera, looking morose. The young Eric was looking away and picking his nose, looking bored. The morning was fresh and cold. I could see mist over the forest below the mountains and fog out over the North Sea. I ran hard and fast along the wet sand where it was good and firm, making a jet noise with my mouth and holding my binoculars and bag down tight to my sides. When I got level with the bunker, I banked inland, slowing as I hit the soft white sand further up the beach. I checked the flotsam and jetsam as I swept over it, but there was nothing interesting looking, nothing worth salvaging, just an old jellyfish, a purple mass with 4 pale rings inside. I altered course slightly to overfly it, going tfow, tfow, and kicking it on the run, blasting a dirty fountain of sand and jelly up around me. Psh! Went the noise of the explosion. I banked again and headed for the bunker. The poles were in good repair. I didn't need the bag of heads and bodies. I visited them all, working through the morning, planting the dead wasp in its paper coffin, not between 2 of the more important poles as I had intended originally, but under the path, just on the island side of the bridge. While I was there, I climbed up the suspension cables to the top of the mainland tower and looked around. I could see the top of the house and one of the skylights over the loft. I could also see the spire of the Church of Scotland in Port Neal, and some smoke coming up from the town chimneys. I took the small knife from my left breast pocket and nicked my left thumb carefully. I smeared the red stuff over the top of the main beam, which crosses from one eye girder to the other one on the tower, and then wiped my small wound with an antiseptic tissue from one of my bags. I scrambled back down after that and retrieved the ball bearing I'd hit the sign with the day before. The first miss called him, Mary, who was Eric's mother, died in childbirth in the house. Eric's head was too big for her. She hemorrhaged and bled to death on the marital bed back in 1960. Eric has suffered from a quite severe migraine all his life, and I'm very much inclined to attribute the ailment to his manner of entry into the world. The whole thing about his migraine and his dead mother had, I think, a lot to do with what happened to Eric. Poor unlucky soul. He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and something very unlikely happened, by which sheer chance mattered more to him than anybody else it could have happened to. But that's what you risk when you leave here. Thinking about it, that means that Eric has killed somebody too. I thought I was the only murderer in the family, but old Eric beat me to it, killing his mom before he'd even drawn breath. Unintentional, admittedly, but it isn't always the thought that counts. The factory said something about fire. I was still thinking about that, wondering what it really meant. The obvious interpretation was that Eric was going to set fire to some dogs, but I was too wise in the ways of the factory to treat that as definite. I suspected there was more to it. In a way, I was sorry Eric was coming back. I'd been thinking of having a war shortly, maybe the next week or so, but with Eric probably going to make an appearance, I had decided against it. I had had a good war for months. The last one had been the ordinary soldiers versus the aerosols. In that scenario, all the 72nd scale armies, complete with their tanks and guns and trucks and stores and helicopters and boats, had to unite against the aerosol invasion. The aerosols were almost impossible to stop, and the soldiers and their weapons and equipment were getting burned and melted all over the place, until one brave soldier, who had clung on to one of the aerosols as it flew back to its base, came back, after many adventures, with the news that their base was a breadboard, moored under an overhang in an inland creek. A combined force of commandos got there just in time and blew the base to smithereens, finally blowing up the overhang on top of the smoking remains. A good war, with all the right ingredients, and a more spectacular ending than most. I even had my father asking what all the explosions and the fire had been about when I got back to the house that evening. But too long ago. Anyway, with Eric on his way, I didn't think it would be a good idea to start another war, only to have to abandon it in the middle of things and start dealing with the real world. I decided I would postpone hostilities for a while. Instead, after I had anointed a few of the more important poles with precious substances, I built a dam system. When I was younger, I used to have fantasies about saving the house by building a dam. There would be a fire in the grass on the dunes, or a plane would have crashed, and all that stopped the cordite in the cellar from going up would be me diverting some of the water from a dam system down a channel and into the house. At one time, my major ambition was to have my father buy me an excavator so that I could make really big dams. But I have a far more sophisticated, even metaphysical approach to dam building now. I realize that you can never really win against water. It'll always triumph in the end, seeping and soaking and building up and undermining and overflowing. All you can really do is construct something that would divert it or block its way for a while. Persuade it to do something it doesn't really want to do. The pleasure comes with the elegance of the compromise you strike between where the water wants to go, guided by gravity and the medium it's moving over, and what you want to do with it. Actually, I think that life has few pleasures to compare with dam building. Give me a good, broad beach with a reasonable slope and not too much seaweed and a fair-sized stream, and I'll be happy all day, any day. By that time, the sun was well up, and I took off my jacket to lay it with my bags and binoculars. Stout stroke dipped and bit and sliced and dug, building a huge triple-deck dam, the main section of which backed up the water in the north burn for 80 paces, not far off the record for the position I'd chosen. I used my usual metal overflow piece, which I keep hidden in the dunes near the best dam building site, and the piece de resistance was an aqueduct, bottomed with an old black plastic rubbish bag I'd found in the driftwood. The aqueduct carried the overflow stream over 3 sections of a bypass channel I'd cut from further up the dam. I built a little village downstream from the dam, complete with roads and a bridge over the remnant of the burn, and a church. Bursting a good big dam, or even just letting it overflow, is almost as satisfying as planning and building it in the first place. I used little shells to represent the people in the town, as usual. Also as usual, none of the shells survived the flood when the dam burst. They all sank, which meant that everybody died. By that time I was very hungry. My arms were getting sore, and my hands were red gripping the spade and digging into the sand by themselves. I watched the first flood of water race down to the sea, muddy and littered, then turned to head for home. "Did I hear you talking on the phone last night?" my father said. I shook my head. "Nope." We were finishing our lunch, sitting in the kitchen, me with my stew, my father with brown rice and seaweed salad. He had his town gear on, brown brogues, brown tweed 3-piece suit, and on the table sat his brown cap. I checked my watch and saw that it was Thursday. It was very unusual for him to go anywhere on a Thursday, whether Port Neal or any further afield. I wasn't going to ask him where he was going, because he'd only lie. When I used to ask him where he was going, he told me to fuck, which he claimed was a small town in the north of Inverness. It was years and a lot of funny looks in the town before I learned the truth. "I'm going out today," he told me between mouthfuls of rice and salad. I nodded, and he continued, "I'll be back late." Perhaps he was going to Port Neal to get drunk in the Rock Hotel, or perhaps he was off to Inverness, where he often goes on business and prefers to keep mysterious. But I suspected that it was really something to do with Eric. Right, I said. I'll take a key so you can lock up when you want to. He clattered his knife and fork down on the empty plate and wiped his mouth on a brown napkin made from recycled paper. Just don't put all the bolts on, all right? Right. You make yourself something to eat this evening, I nodded again, not looking up as I ate. And you'll do the washing up? I nodded again. I don't think Diggs will come round again, but if he does, I want you to stay out of his way. Don't worry, I told him, and sighed. You'll be all right then? He said, standing. Mm-hmm, I said, cleaning up the last of the stew. I'll be off then. I looked up in time to see him place his cap on his head and look round the kitchen, patting his pockets as he did so. He looked at me again and nodded. I said, goodbye. Yes, he said, right you are. I'll see you later. Yes. He turned around, then turned back, looked once more around the room, then shook his head quickly and went to the door, taking his stick from the corner by the washing machine on his way out. I heard the outer door slam, then silence. I sighed. I waited a minute or so and then got up, leaving my almost clean plate, and went through the house to lounge, where I could see the path leading away through the dunes and towards the bridge. My father was walking along it, head bowed, going quickly with a sort of anxious swagger as he swung the stick. As I watched, he struck out with it at some wildflowers growing by the path side. I ran upstairs, pausing by the back stairwell window to watch my father disappear round the dune before the bridge. Ran up the stairs, got to the door to the study, and twisted the handle briskly. The door was firm. It didn't shift a millimeter. One day he would forget, I was sure, but not today. Okay, and that is not the end of Chapter 2, but that is the end of tonight. We'll finish Chapter 2 up next week. Thank you for listening, everybody. Same time, same place. Next week.